All right. Well, thank you for coming, everyone. I imagine there will be some others joining later. I'm going to do my best to stare at the little camera so it looks like I'm talking to you all. Um, this is an issue or a situation where, Mitch and I were talking about what is really important right now about understanding what is happening in our federal government and how it relates to the story of Japanese American incarceration and the National Park Service's involvement. It is a pretty complex and nuanced topic. We're going to wander about a little bit in the personal and as well as in our family histories, and then this current administration's actions, and then some of the things that we're doing in our respective worlds to try and make sure that this story isn't lost to history. So starting with introductions, I am Jesse Chakrin. I'm the executive director of a small foundation called the Fund for People in Parks, and we work primarily in the American West. So we have the opportunity to work with primarily lesser known, smaller and lesser known national park sites and try to elevate undertold stories in the national park system. That is how I find myself working with the national park sites that are also Japanese incarceration sites. Prior to that, I spent 24 years working in the Park Service. I started my career up in Denali National Park as a wilderness ranger for 5 summers, and then moved on down to Yosemite and spent another 19 years working as a ranger there, primarily trying to open access to underrepresented communities and working specifically with the University of California, Merced, both in professional development as well as opportunities for leadership development for undergraduate students. One of the things that I think is important about that is it just was an introduction to an expansion of my mindset around who national parks are for, what are the important stories that they tell, and how do we make sure that they are representative of or they live up to this ideal of democracy that we hold them to, that this is what we think they are. They are some of the most important places in the country, either from a cultural standpoint or from a natural standpoint, and they're protected for everyone. And in practice, that is vastly different, as far as who gets to go to national parks, who are able to take advantage of these amazing places. And there's an opportunity within the Park Service, at least prior to this administration, to try and move towards equity in that respect. I'm going to turn it over to Mitch to introduce himself, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about how we're deeply connected to the Japanese American incarceration story.
Thanks, Jesse. I'm Mitch Homma, and I'm the president of the board for the Amache Alliance. And Amache is the newest Japanese American site added to the national park system. The Amache National Historic Site was designated in 2022 and established. We had a ribbon cutting last year. And so Amache's been around formally under the National Park Service management for a little over a year. And we just have a plethora of projects going on that we're going to talk about with respect to the reviews and some of the secretarial and presidential executive orders coming down the pipe. And so just to the Amache Alliance is mostly based in California, where all the Amache families were from. The two local groups in Colorado there, where Amache is, of course, is still the Grenada High School Amache Preservation Society. And while the government's closed, they've pretty much taken over all the tours and interfacing with the public. So it's great to have local boots on the ground there. And of course, the Denver University, along with some other universities, the Amache Archaeological Field School program. So a lot of stuff, a lot of programs going on surrounding Amache, and we'll get into that in some of the slides coming up with respect to the Park Service and some of the presidential executive orders and secretarial orders and how that's affecting some of the programs and stuff. My personal connection with Amache and the Department of Justice site. So I had 3 generations that were incarcerated during World War II. The top 3 photos there are a picture of my great-grandparents who were here in the U.S. as Baptist missionaries to the U.S. and planting churches and working at Japanese American churches in Southern California. And then, of course, my grandparents and my father took quote unquote the more standard route. You know, they went to Santa Anita Assembly Center and then Amache. So grandfather was both my grandparents were USC grads, and grandfather was a dentist. He was a dentist at Amache, and then unfortunately, like a lot of families, you know, Amache changed our family dynamics forever. Grandfather Homa, who I never knew, died in Amache at the age of 44. I was told he didn't like the food and he pretty much just didn't eat. And that's his funeral photo there with the Homa and the Wada family in the photo.
My family was also, so I'm a Hapa, half Japanese, Russian, and Austrian. And on my mother's side, my grandmother's family was incarcerated also at Amache. Three members were incarcerated there. One was arrested by the FBI prior to 9066 order coming down. My grandfather and my grandmother actually both were able to avoid incarceration because my grandfather had moved to New York City to become an architect from Seattle, or to take his first architecture job. His name is Minoru Yamasaki, and he is the Minoru Yamasaki, if you have heard of him, the World Trade Center and many other buildings. Um, I think it was a pretty so his parents also were able to avoid incarceration, and his younger brother, because he was able to get them out of Seattle um, during the confusion after the order and before all the families were actually rounded up. And so it is an interesting history. Someone who grew up personally with family that have experienced this. The photo on the bottom right. So Aki is my grandmother's sister, my great aunt Aki, and her husband Jim Yamazaki is the photo on the bottom right, and that he actually was commissioned into the 106th Infantry 1 week before Pearl Harbor and ended up serving as a combat medic in the German theater and was captured twice by Germans. Was in two POW camps after the war. He finished his residency and then was conscripted by the Atomic Bomb Commission to study the impact of nuclear fallout on children and fetuses in Hiroshima and then Nagasaki, and led to a lifelong passion for human and civil rights and also a nuclear non-proliferation, that he was active in that movement until I think about 100. He lived to 104. Um, my my grandfather, the one of the interesting things about my generation and at least growing up in Michigan, uh, and also the racism and the professional denigration that my grandfather experienced. I think this is a very common and not relatively common story where it was not very easy to be Japanese. My cousin wrote a book about our grandfather's life, and one of the pages says, "Imagine tasting something bitter," and that is how everyone used to say Japanese, the taste in your mouth. And so it was really interesting being one of three Asian people in my community growing up and the only Asian male. And the experience of not really wanting to be Japanese was one that was pretty powerful and crossed three generations, me, my parents' generation, and my grandparents. And not necessarily not wanting to be, but it was not easy to be Japanese. And the pressure to assimilate was a powerful one. I think the reason that this is important to the story is that there are so many people like me who are rediscovering their connections to their Japanese roots and their Japanese American roots, and this incarceration story that is a part of many of our families later in life, because there are resources available. The national park sites hold a lot of those resources, and it's just something that is is a pretty challenging thing to grow up with not very deep roots, because my grandparents did not want to talk about or tell the stories of their own experiences. They were too traumatic. I'm going to move on. Mitch, is there anything you wanted to add? Any last things you wanted to add about your family? You are muted currently. Mitch, you want to unmute and say what you're saying again?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm kind of opposite you, Jesse. I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in both my great grandparents' churches in Gardena and Seattle. And while the family never talked about the World War II years, right, surely everyone in both churches knew the family and knew the family story. And so I actually learned more about the family's World War II experience from other church members, not my own family. So.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the other thing, and it's a stereotype, but there is a certain amount of stoicism that is a part of being a Japanese person, and especially a Japanese male of a certain generations. And my great uncle Jim, he was diagnosed with PTSD at 87 years old at the VA when they finally asked him if he had bad dreams, and he said, "Every night." And so it's just one of those things where you're like, man, they just did not want to talk about it. Anyhow, at least in my family, did not want to talk about it. So it's a bit of a quick transition here, but I think, one of the questions that often comes up around Japanese incarceration sites in national parks in the context of national parks is why? Why are they national park sites and why are they of national significance? And I think, my own story and Mitch's are examples of how this is a national story. It impacted Japanese people around the country. My grandparents were refugees in their own country, as were their parents and my grandfather's brother. And I think that's just a really important experience to remember because it is happening again right now. The brief history of national park involvement in incarceration sites, Manzanar being the first designated in 1992. Mitch reminded me that Manzanar, when designated, was intended to actually represent all of the incarceration experience, and that none of the other sites were going to be recognized officially as national park units. That it became clear that that was not going to be adequate because of the geographic realities of incarceration sites and the very deeply personal experiences that each one of these share, hold, and tell. And so, not all of them are recognized as national park sites, not all of the collection centers, but I'd say almost all of them are recognized as National Historic Landmarks, if not national park sites. Minidoka was next, using the Antiquities Act, 2008, or in 2001, sorry, and then in 2008 was designated by Congress as a National Historic Site. Tule Lake, land of the no-nos and the largest of the incarceration sites, was made a national monument also in 2008. You may remember who was president back in those days. And then Honouliuli, Hanako. Do you want to talk about that at all? You were, yeah, no?
Well, I don't know. What do you want me to say? It was an
Uh,
incarceration site, Department of Army site back then. And yeah, no monument. But don't forget about Bainbridge Island as a unit, and then the National Memorial that's in over by the Capitol building. Those are the other ones too.
yeah, thank you. The other cool thing or interesting story about Honouliuli is that it was also a POW camp. And so there were Japanese Americans, Japanese, as well as Germans and Italians, all in Honouliuli, and one of the more recent national park sites. And then Amache, and Mitch will talk a lot more about Amache in just a few minutes. The other major program, outside of the ones that Hanako just mentioned, is the Japanese American Confinement Sites Grant Program. And this is a really important program for the system-wide. I know that there are some challenges around applying for these grants, as well as some challenges around the equitable distribution of these funds. That said, it is a very significant fund source, and I do know that, one of the opportunities to weave through the Doge morass was the Jack site grants actually were issued this year, which was incredibly surprising to me. The website does not have any update for the coming year, and I don't know that there will be one, but I am hoping beyond hope. It is very doubtful. $38 million authorized. I believe 10 million was a part of the reauthorization in 2023. These funds will be granted until expended, and there is now an education program associated with that as well. Like I said, the funds that were the grant proposals that were accepted from the prior year, those funds were distributed this year, which was a shock to me. All right. This is an unreadable slide, and I am aware of that. The reason that it exists in here is because these slides could be a resource, and I will send them, Kimiko, I will send them to you. And these are some of the sites that have received Jack's grant funding, and some of the other programs that people are interested in where those money go to. I know it's relatively unreadable. All right. Now we get into the fun part. The incredibly frustrating realities of the current administration. This has been a challenge. I am not only going to talk about the specific orders and administrative actions that affect incarceration sites within the National Park Service, but the National Park Service writ large, because I think those resources that are available in the national park system impact the administration of those national park sites, as well as the resources available to support other of the incarceration system and sites, whether or not they're designated. And so we're going to start from the beginning. And day one executive orders, just so folks know that are not deep in the policy land of things. And Mitch, feel free to jump in at any moment. But executive orders come from the president's office, whether or not they are written by the president, that is basically immaterial in this administration, but he signs all of them, which gives them the force of full executive orders. Day one, they rolled back a ton of prior executive orders that were related to conservation and climate change. This deeply impacts the National Park Service because they had been investing huge amounts of resources in understanding how to protect and preserve these parks forever, and that includes addressing climate change. They also took an early action to fire any employees that were in probationary status. I just want to make clear that these are not folks that had anything wrong in their professional background. Probationary status is a standard operating procedure. When you are hired into the federal government in a permanent position, you are in probationary status for often 1 year. And so they just looked at the list of every permanent Park Service and federal employee in probationary status and then terminated all of them because they had the legal grounding to do so, whether or not that was ethical. It was a crazy first month. Secretarial orders come from the office of the secretary. So this is the department level. This would be Secretary Doug Burgum. And then administrative actions are ones that are coming either from our more arcane offices, like the Office of Personnel Management or the Office of Management and Budget. These are orders that can very, very significantly impact the ability of federal employees to do their job, whether or not they come directly from the president. They may be in line with presidential guidelines. One that was early was this focus on energy dominance, and this is to provide, in general, to provide language and cover for extractive resource development within public lands. Think mining and drilling. Think ANWR, Gates of the Arctic. These are the ones that are making the news. But making sure that there's the ability to extract resources from public lands that were where it was prior prohibited. They also started the review process for the use of the Antiquities Act with what appeared to be an angling towards the rescinding of national monument status. Probably top of that list would be Bears Ears, where there is uranium deposits that they want to mine. But also on that list would be monuments for sites of conscience or historical sites that tell difficult stories. Think Stonewall, think Manzanar, think Cesar Chavez, think Minidoka, not Minidoka, Tule Lake, think Amache. You know, these are these places that tell really powerful parts of our history that we want to learn from, that we think of as cautionary tales, lessons where we are in the process of becoming a more perfect union, the democratic process that started with the Declaration of Independence and now seems to be derailed. It is also the time when we first started to see actions, the deferred resignation program. This is Fork 1 and Fork 2. These are these incredibly insulting emails that were sent out by the secretary to encourage career employees to retire. These are, it has been very confusing for people to understand what's real, what isn't real, and how to make decisions. It is also in line with the time, actually, day one was also when the hiring freeze was implemented, and that continues. And so anyone who leaves using DRP, the Deferred Resignation Program, voluntary retirements, or voluntary separations, those positions cannot be refilled unless they are law enforcement or first responder oriented. And so this is a kind of a war of attrition where you offer incredibly attractive packages or make work incredibly uncomfortable and terrible for people so that they make choices that they have to make, not that they want to make. And then those positions are not going to be refilled. A really difficult situation. 3426, ensuring national parks are open and accessible. You lose staff. Oftentimes, losing staff would reduce hours. Maybe they can't staff things full-time anymore. This order directed them to remain open and accessible to the public. This is more about economic and revenue generation for surrounding gateway communities than it is about national park sites necessarily. This is also around the time when we started to see these crazy credit card policies where you could only put $1 on your credit card, effectively eliminating the use of purchase cards by the federal government. This is an amazing, these are people who have done their research and they know where the pain points are and they know how to bring agencies to their knees. You shut off purchase cards and credit cards and you will stop the normal function of every park unit in the national park system. It is impossible to function without purchase cards. There are so many things that certain parks do, including things like at Point Reyes, where they buy their chlorine for their water treatment system on a purchase card because that is the easiest and fastest way for them to maintain the supply of chlorine for their water treatment system. Those things could not happen. Or rangers at Channel Islands could no longer travel to the islands because their travel cards had a $1 limit and they couldn't pay for their ticket on the ferry. Pretty intense stuff. Restoring truth and sanity. This is the one that really hits incarceration sites the hardest. This is the order that I think of as the most in the 1984 vein of orders of all of them. It is double speak that I have, it just hits me in my heart and makes me want to scream. Restoring truth and sanity to American history. Inappropriate or disparaging to Americans, living or dead. This is the order. Disparaging, boy, that's pretty gray. That's pretty gray. And what it has forced is a review of every website, sign, memorial. All of these, every park had to undergo a review of every single one of those and flag and send to Washington for further review any that would be potentially problematic. This is a process that had, I think, over 500 items sent to DC for review. They are then working their way across the country. This is paused. You have not seen any news about this recently because the shutdown has paused that work. The first signs that were removed, one was from John Muir, that was voluntary by the park staff. The others were directed by the secretary. Acadia had to remove a sign about climate change and sea level rise. Jamaica Bay had to remove, this is in Jamaica Bay in New York, they had to remove a sign that indicated that national parks are there to tell full stories, full histories, including the parts that are challenging to us, the parts that make us better because we reflect upon them and learn from our mistakes, including Japanese incarceration was listed on that sign. Mitch, I know you'll have stuff to add to that when we get to your slides. All right, I'm going to try and blast a little bit faster. I know I'm getting a little slow here. Executive, Make America Beautiful Again. Sounds great. Once again, interesting doublespeak. But the real important words in this order were about driving economic growth and expanding access to outdoor recreation, including motorized recreation. So this is a lot of the ways that they build these cases. They lay the foundation for opening access to motorized use, to opening access to, or eliminating the roadless rule, or making sure that there are every opportunity for economic development happens within our national park sites. Executive Order or Secretarial Order 3440. This one is pretty wonky, but really important. They realigned the National Park Police chain of command to go directly to the secretary, which is an appointed position. So now the superintendent of the park police reports to a political appointee, not a career federal employee. That's crazy. That's crazy. And hopefully will be rescinded as soon as possible, because that is not the way you want things to go. Secretarial Order 3442, Land and Water Conservation Fund. This is a really important fund source for both purchasing land adjacent to national parks for conservation, and then providing underserved communities with opportunities to connect to and access public land and or programs on their own sites. It is now being reprioritized to support outdoor recreation infrastructure. Once again, economic drivers and things that can be aimed at friends of the administration is probably the best way. This is a pay-to-play administration that has become very, very clear. And last but not least, and this is not an exhaustive list, there are many other administrative actions that have occurred. But the contingency plan for the potential lapse in appropriations happened last month. It is now a full lapse and is closing in on the longest federal shutdown in history. And the plan that they utilized to furlough employees led to 65% of National Park Service staff being furloughed. And then a designation where there is some exempt work, like law enforcement and first responders that actually get paid. And then some accepted work, like being a superintendent of a park, maybe for a few hours a week at most, and that does not get paid. That is not paid work, but they get to do some accepted duties throughout, so very often the only person working full-time in a park is a primary law enforcement officer and not the park superintendent. One thing I want to say in aggregate, the hiring freezes have been extended over and over and over again and are still in place. The loss of talent due to DRP, the deferred resignation, voluntary early retirements, and voluntary separations, in combination with the hiring freeze, is massive and is unquantified as of this point. But I would say the vast majority of park leadership is gone at this point. Many parks, including parks like Yosemite, are lacking 5 to 7 of their leadership team at any one time. And so it is so important to recognize that the park rangers who are still there are doing their very best under incredibly difficult situations to hold these treasures in this unbroken chain. And it is impossible. It's an impossible task. It makes me incredibly emotional. So sorry. This is really tough. It's a really tough time. It's a really tough time. Mitch, you came off mute.
Nope, go ahead.
I'm going to turn it over to you. So what are we doing? What are we doing in response to this and all of this challenge? What are we going to do?
Yep, and I'm going to kind of show Amache's right in the middle of this, right? When the first review orders came down, our website was our National Park Service website for Amache was one of the first ones taken down. Of course, the band, since we were just established and, then Secretary Deb Helen, her top banner for our site was, we're going to tell the whole history in your voices, right? We're going to tell the truth and the whole history in your voices. And that was on our website. So, of course, that was one of the first ones to come down and be reviewed, and we fought to get it back up and stuff. We had everything on our website backed up prior to that, so we didn't lose anything. But we have a whole plethora of programs as we're standing up this new, National Historic Site. And for those of you who don't know, right before the shutdown, our Amache National Site Junior Ranger book was just about to come out. They were going to send some copies out to us and stuff, and then their credit cards got shut down, and they got shut down, and their accounts got locked and all that stuff. But our Junior Ranger Activity book is done. The graphics was done by an Amache descendant, which is fantastic. It did go through the review process and everything. And so, there's one example where, Amache's wading through these review processes and stuff getting sent to DC. And for those of you who came to the pilgrimage last year, all three pieces of the Amache Memorial are back in the Memorial House. So the wooden Gold Star honor roll and the wooden Amache Memorial planks on the back wall were new and added last year. And so, of course, that had to go under formal review and review sent to Washington, D.C. and stuff like that. But again, this is another example of where, we're weeding our way through. We're not standing by and not doing anything and waiting for this to blow over. We're going to continue to plow on through and be smart about it, be factual. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Jesse. Some of the other current projects going on, and so our rec hall, our 11F rec hall that's out there on site. We have a whole interior exhibit program going on that is funded, and we have the Park Service and interpretive rangers taking part in the reviews and helping develop those displays. And of course, the other big grant we're working on is updating our self-guided driving tour and almost all the signs that are out there on site. So we have like 2 generations of signs. The very first ones, like the white elementary school sign there, and then from about 15 years ago, when we were a National Historic Landmark, those NPS signage. And so our whole driving tour is moving to alleviate some of the traffic and a better traffic pattern. But and also, Jesse's organization is helping us with the front entrance signage of Amache. And so all this new stuff and language and new sign, we're wading through it and trying to be really careful and factual, but we're marching on. We've been told by the Park Service and stuff, don't stop and wait for us. And so we're marching on and trying to be smart about it. And of course, some of these programs are probably going to get delayed because of the NPS reviews required and stuff like that. But none of them have been shut down so far. And so, and we're moving on. Go ahead. Did you have something, Jesse? If not,
I was just going to say, there's a review process in place for the currently existing signage and displays and educational waysides, et cetera. There is not a review process in place for future interpretive media of any type yet. And so we'll see. It would deeply impact our work at People in Parks if that became a reality, because we do and have for our entire existence, part of our focus has been undertold stories. And so we are trying to use all of our network and our access to those in the know to figure out what's coming and how to, we have a pretty good idea of how to navigate, but if there are any specifics, I'm happy to share those with anyone who's interested as I learn those things.
Yep, and again, just trying to weather the storm, with Amache, like trying to stay factual and all the facts and stuff like that, right? Amache, I think, was the first camp to lift the camera ban in the summer of 1943. And so the private collection of photos of everyday life in Amache is just fantastic, and even color photos and stuff. And so we're trying to utilize a lot of that in the interpretation. The archaeological work by the Denver University Amache Research Project is just phenomenal. They've been out there almost 20 years now, surveying the whole site. And so a lot of their work is being flowed into our management plan and the survey work. So they're actually they're going to end up saving the National Park Service a ton of money by reusing a lot of that work that's been done in the past. The 30 years of preservation work done out there at Amache is all going to be reused and flow into programs. I know the NPS and the Amache Research Project people are working on a walking trail. You know, they have the outline in the bones of the walking trail that should be out from the restored barracks, you know, to a path out there. And so we'll probably unveil that at this year's pilgrimage. And so,
Cool.
Next slide. I think that's my.
Yeah.
Of course, you know, the youth involvement in educational outreach, right? Being a National Historic Site, the education is one of the huge goals. And of course, the picture on the left there, the Grenada High School students, you know, the Amache Preservation Society, you know, they've been doing preservation. They're the local boots on the ground and have been doing preservation out there at Amache for the last 30 years. They're the whole reason why Amache is part of the national park system, is because of the generations of those high schoolers out there preserving and taking care of the site. And our new program, you know, a lot of you online know Mintonai, who passed away a few years ago. Mintonai, when we became a national park site or designated to be a national park site, reached out to our leadership and asked us to reach out to the Sand Creek community, the Sand Creek Massacre community. That's their site's 45 minutes north of Amache. And so we have a Amache Sand Creek Youth Ambassador Program for that to foster our communities, our respective communities' storytelling and historical facts of what happened at both those sites. And so you can see a lot of the education and youth movement through those programs. I was talking to both John Hopper and the Rangers recently, and visitation at Amache is through the roof. The school tours and stuff from all the schools in the region now getting to visit a national park site, with providing relevant history to schools in that region. And so again, like Jesse mentioned earlier, the regional aspect of where the site is outside of California, and to a region that, you know, a lot of those kids probably wouldn't get to go to California to visit an actual World War II Japanese American site. Next slide, Jesse. I think it's back to you.
Back to me. Yeah. So, like I said earlier, you know, we had people in parks have been working on trying to elevate undertold stories throughout the national park system, especially, well, we only can work in the West. So it's Intermountain and Pacific West regions, Rockies all the way to American Samoa. At Amache, we were happy to fund Mitch and the crew with the support for an updated entrance plaza. So it's not just the signs, but also where you arrive, some shade structures, some ways that can make a park site more welcoming to the visiting public. And with all of the increased use, you know, a little bit of shade out in the eastern plains of Colorado isn't a bad thing for school kids. At Hanauli'uli, this is, as Hanako knows, it is a very difficult place to access because you have to cross private land. And that park deserves its story to be told. And so we're funding a park film for Hanauli'uli. At Manzanar, we've done the most work. It is just they've had more staff. They have more staff than any of the other sites. And so, you know, and especially Jeff, if you're still on, the work that you've done out there, both unearthing and recording the history of that place is truly beyond impressive. I think you have you can correct me about this. I think it was 87 papers. Is it 87? Something like that. It's an amazing number of papers that you have produced and published about Manzanar. And I am currently wading through the Children's Village one that you sent me. So thank you for that and all of the incredible resources for that place and others. We have funded oral history recordings and preservation, a reprinting of Ansel Adams' book of Born Free and Equal. If you have not seen that book, it is a beautiful book and a powerful story. Ansel Adams took those photographs on his own time and had a very, very strong personal orientation towards civil rights. And that's not a well-known part of his history, but that is a very important part of his history. There's a very small grant for making producing 3D models for tactile elements so that kids can print these at their own schools. And then the one that has gotten the most press by far is the baseball field reconstruction. And Dan talked about this a little bit or a lot bit yesterday. He talked about us a little bit. He talked about baseball a lot. But baseball is, I think, a really important story because it crosses across these societal boundaries. It makes the story accessible to a segment of the country that would not seek out this story on their own. I know that when baseball was played at Manzanar for the first time in over 40 years, that made above the fold print edition LA Times front page. That is a powerful place to be. And then I was also on the New York Times digital edition front page. And that's just a really amazing way to reach people. And also if you think about the expression of joy as protest, I think finding ways to live your life despite being in a prison camp and celebrating with each other was also one of the ways, and Jeff, please correct me if I'm wrong about this, but kids from outside the camps would actually come and play baseball with the kids inside Manzanar. And I think it's just an expression of this both physical boundaries being crossed as well as the ability to recognize others' humanity in a very difficult time where people are being dehumanized by the federal government and their policies. One that I'm working on, I mentioned slightly, was Children's Village. This is the only orphanage within the incarceration system, and it was at Manzanar, and there were over 120 kids. And I think this is truly important right now because we are currently, with the same Alien Enemies Act, tearing families apart. There are orphans being created every day by ICE and Border Patrol, and the way that they are incarcerating and deporting people, building prison camps, reauthorizing the use of the same military sites as prison camps. It is just beyond, the irony is just so powerful. It is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. And Tule Lake, we helped them finish their visitor center. That site, during its existence, the largest, as well as the home of the no-nos, the ones that would not sign the loyalty pledge. And that site is a pretty complicated place and has some real issues around power generation, access. And so it's really important that the spotlight stays on Tule Lake right now because there is a lot of pressure on that site currently. That was about it. I think we got there. We're 2 minutes over time. I wanted to leave 15 minutes for questions. That was a little fast in some spots. And if there are any questions, Kimiko, I don't know if there are questions in the chat or if there's any questions in the audience. Mitch, anything you want to say in closing?
No, we'll give people if people have some questions for us, we'll give them time.
I think they're all furiously typing, but people can also just unmute and ask questions as well. Oh, Hanako.
So I just have a question, I guess, more for Jesse. With your organization, do you have the capability of holding park units accountable in the storytelling? Because I feel like there are some of the park units that are struggling a little bit more than others. And it's been a problem, at least on the inside when I was within the Park Service, to get my colleagues to do the right thing. And I know it's been frustrating and it's at an important site. We're talking about Tule Lake, which tells the most comprehensive story from, just the basic WRA site, but then becoming a segregation center. And I don't necessarily feel that they have they want to work with the community in a way that is true. I don't know. I don't want to say true. It's more accurate in the storytelling of how things actually happen out there. And yeah.
I think, I don't have a direct answer for you, but I think the place that we have the opportunity to help tell more complete stories is through the use of, this opportunity to fund projects, but then also have a direct connection and involvement in the production of and review of those materials and making sure that those are true and complete stories that are told. And so it's not necessarily direct. I don't have any oversight capability, but we do have the opportunity through our grant making process to make sure that the money that is spent from us has real involvement from community members and is vetted. Because I think what Mitch is saying is absolutely right, is you got to stand on the facts right now. And so I was just in St. Louis at Gateway Arch, and the story of civil rights and the story of slavery in that area is powerful ones. And they just reopened the Dred Scott, the courthouse where the Dred Scott hearings, Dred and Harriet Scott were first tried. They were just suing for their freedom. And it's beautiful. It just reopened. It was probably $2.5 million project, and it obviously tells a story that this administration may not want to tell at this moment, but they have not been shut down yet because they're standing on the established facts as we know them now. And so I think making sure that we are telling the truth and the whole truth, and having that be our motivation right now, I think that's really important. And I think it actually could help the Park Service as opposed to harm it. My leverage, though, Hanako, is really about the money, and the money can be actually useful leverage. And so I think it's valuable that I feel fortunate to be in the seat that I'm in currently so that I can help to elevate and tell these stories right now and tell full stories. Any other questions? Any questions about executive orders? Any questions of how it's playing out in the Park Service or in the federal government writ large? One of the things that unless there is a question, I have something I do want to say. One of the challenges that I see right now is that the government has become a bad faith employer. And when you lose a lot of your senior leadership in one moment, there's opportunity for advancement, but who will be advancing? How are we going to recruit the talent that is necessary? These jobs are not great paying. They do not compete well in the open market. People do them because they believe in the mission. They believe in democracy. They believe in the fact that these places are protected for everyone forever. And they want to be a part of something that is meaningful. But if you're a bad faith employer, if you're constantly putting people on notice that they may be terminated, if you're constantly making it difficult for them to do their jobs in any way, or furloughing people or firing them, it is really difficult to attract top talent when you are not paying commensurate wages with the open market. And so a worry I have is for the future. I have a worry for the future. My hope is that I keep saying this to my friends who are in and are struggling, is that if they can hold on, there's the potential that they could be running the Park Service in just a few years. But I know holding on right now is not easy. It's not easy. It's a very difficult environment.
Well, I guess going off of that, Jesse, it's like, I think that there's fundamental issues within the hiring systems within the Park Service as well, because there's that gap between the GS 9 to 11, and then it gets even harder to find that GS 12 and 13 to get into leadership at the GS 14 and 15, let alone getting into the senior executive service opportunities to actually run stuff. And so although it's nice to think that, yeah, maybe you could be running the Park Service in a few years, the reality is highly unlikely because of those gaps, right? And as they get closer to the top, there's very few GS 13s out there, but there's a lot more GS 14s. And so you have this huge gap. And especially for those who are entry level, you got the GS Park guides or the positions that are dead end positions that can't even advance. And then they get capped off with like the techs.
Yeah, I think you know, in my most hopeful, Hanako, is when I think about I think of this as a stress test of all of the systems of the federal government, and that where the weaknesses are being revealed, the gaps, the holes are being revealed. And my hope is that our core center of the democratic process survives, that there's a body to revive when we get through this, and that will have learned a lot about how to do it better. That's me at my most hopeful, is that we're seeing we're seeing the cracks that need to be filled. You know, we can't rely on decorum. We can't, shame should not be a governing policy. It clearly doesn't work anymore. And so, yeah, I think the federal hiring process and the real issues that we have around advancement, hiring lines, if you start as a park guide, where do you go? If you're not an 025 Ranger, you know, what's your real opportunity? If you're not law enforcement, how many opportunities do you have? There's so much going on that I think needs to be fixed, and I hope that we have the opportunity to do so. I think we have a hand up.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about diversity at NPS. You know, regularly we get tapped for, hey, do you know any young people who are up and coming that we can get into the pipeline? And, you know, very interested in people of color, which I appreciate. For a long time, NPS has been very white centric from the top down over and over and over again. And I'm especially sensitive to it because you're dealing with sites of oppression as well as tourist landmarks, and they're very different kinds of things. So you talk about NPS having this big purge of leadership going. Does that mean that culture of the old white boys club is going away with it? Or is that who's remaining? And I really kind of wonder about how successful is any person of color going to be going into that pipeline, knowing that that's what they're going to have to deal with once they actually secure the job.
Yeah. Mitch, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, so from Amache's point of view, the biggest Amache's fortunate that we have a great relationship with our local community. And we actually have a lot of the Grenada High School kids that want to become part of this pipeline. And I think the biggest challenge is the application system, right? The Amache Alliance has been talking a lot about setting up a class or setting up an educational opportunity to teach these
I'll do it.
Grenada High School students how to apply for part-time summer NPS job or
I'll do it, Mitch.
interpretive. Oh,
I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll teach that class. Just put me in touch.
okay.
Happy to do it. I did it for
And so
18
we
years.
have young people, and same with the Sand Creek site, you know, part of the Youth Ambassador Program. I think there's kids there that are really interested in the preservation of their legacy and family historical sites. And not only, you know, the ones local to them, but, you know, across the NPS spectrum. And that's where I see, you know, organizations like us, we can help educate about the process for applying. We're not going to change the application system, you know, between us right now, but we need to make it easier for them to apply. I mean, I've looked at it and I don't even know what some of these questions or how to respond to some of the things on the application.
And you're a little
I think
rocket
I'm fairly well
scientist.
educated in stuff, and right, and if it's confusing me, what's it going to do to a 16 or 18-year-old high schooler or a person just out of high school or in junior college or something, right? And
Biff, and also to further address the question, I spent part of a big part of my career, 17 and a half years, was in an effort to have the National Park Service better represent the communities that they serve. And I spent 17 years working on that directly, and I made a very small change in Yosemite, and that's it. Some of those staff went to other parks, but in the time that I was doing that job, the percentage of rangers that were of diverse backgrounds went down by 1%. 17 years of direct effort, and the numbers got worse. And I would just say that your instincts about who is leaving and who is staying are probably correct. The people who are getting advanced right now are probably are very much in line with administration policy and desire. And so, yeah, I'd say it's going to get worse before it gets better, is the reality. And I think there will be parks that are places that are very supportive of rangers of all backgrounds, and there are going to be parks where that's not going to be the case. And I think it'll be important to have a network that is understands what's actually happening on the ground before recommending certain, parks as places of employment. I think it's just people are going to have to be really careful, because I think some environments are going to be real challenging and get worse. So it's just going to be difficult to navigate. And I like I said, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And that's not happy news. I'm sorry, that just seems to be reality. Hanako, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna just also respond to Biff, because it's like, before, I think when I pulled these numbers was when we established the employee resource group that's focused on Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders. And at that time, it was 86% white, 83% white, or 63% white male. So what the fork in the road, knowing a lot of my colleagues who have since left are mostly people of color, who, can't stay in the situation. Yes, although the Park Service tries to recruit people of color, the issue that exists is that there's actually no support for them once they're in there. Like, it took us several years to establish the employee resource group, and I believe all of the groups have been disbanded, if I recall correctly. And that already took us several years to just get the ERG up. That's how I actually met Jesse. And then when we went up to Yosemite, we're like, oh my God, there's so many Asians in Yosemite. Like, it was so exciting, but, until the community, like not only the Japanese American community or the Park Service community, creates an infrastructure to actually support people of color, it's going to be really hard. Because as someone who was in the federal government for 10 years and essentially 8 years within the Park Service, I went through like a GS7 to a GS12 position, got a superintendency, but still got zero support at the top, was always questioned at every single turn on everything. And at a certain point, it wasn't worth it to do it. So I left. And ultimately, I did want to say this to Jesse, like, you could probably hopefully be the next director of the Park Service, because after leaving the Park Service, if you're in an ED position for a year or more, you qualify for the Senior Executive Service leadership
Really?
opportunity. So there's recruitment on that end to get around it. And that's how I kind of found out that could potentially be an opportunity to get back in at a higher level without having to go through the GS series. But anyways. But we need support from the community.
I 100% agree with you, because I think that recruitment it's less than half of the story. Recruitment's important, but retention is where you actually change culture. Retention programs are the ones that actually change culture. It's because you create the community that people want to stay in. And I beat this drum forever. I was like, you can't have a single intern. You can't even have two. Bring in 5 to 10. Create a sense of community within communities, so that people have somewhere that feels safe, where they don't have to explain who they are or why they're there. They can just be who they are. And that is crucial when you're asking people to push their comfort zones. And that may be, geographic, that may be cultural, that may be so many things, but we need to do better at creating those safe spaces for people, and we're doing worse now. So, yeah, it's going to be a long, it's going to be a long road. It's going to be a long road. It is interesting. I left the Park Service and then my pay went from GS9 to GS14, in 1 month. I think I was underpaid by the Park Service.
Being on the outside as just a lay public person
Yeah.
who's trying to support NPS, I have to say it's really frustrating to see the excitement of Hanako's hire come into the community and the absolute heartbreak 10 years later to see her leaving screaming
Yeah.
because of how hostile it was to her as an individual. And I just have to say, that's going to have to get addressed too. It can't just be switching names up. It has to be really, what are we doing to support people and knowing when to apply pressure and when not to. So again, my hat is off to Hanako. We all love and respect what you brought to NPS, and we all were really heartbroken that you didn't thrive there, for all of us.
Agreed. Agreed. And Hanako is one amongst so many incredibly talented humans that come into the Park Service with a lot of hope and leave crushed. And like I said, I think of the institutions of our government, the promise that the Park Service holds is a beautiful one. It is a promise, it is an ideal, a democratic ideal that it does not currently live up to, but strives towards. And I think that's the reason that I still believe in it so deeply, is because not what it is, but what it could be. And that is also how I feel about this country. And I get really emotional about that too. I don't know, man. I don't know what to do about it except for to keep going, because this is really, it is the democracy, the possibility that it holds is worth fighting for. It's worth fighting for.
And I think you're right, Jesse. I know we love all of our Amache Rangers to death. I think all of them came into Amache not knowing much about the World War II Japanese American experience, and in the year and a half that they've been with us, right? We have a bunch of, we have 5 champions for our community out there now, and it's what I put in the chat before. We all have to do our little bit and just keep plugging away. At times it looks bleak and heartening, but I can see the good in what our community is doing, not only the Amache site, but all the sites, the Jaxie community and all that stuff. We just have to keep plugging away, and we have to have faith and believe it's going to get better. It may get worse for a time, but we all got to do our little part, and we have to believe it's going to be better at some point.
I completely agree. I think there's a lot of ways that folks throughout the parks communities are responding to this moment, and I really want to be in the part of that is planting the flag in our core values, and not ceding that ground, because there's risk in action and there is risk in inaction, and I don't want to look back and wish I had done more. And so, the reason that, we have so many new projects in incarceration sites this year is because, we want to show, where do we stand? Where do we stand as an organization? Where do we stand as a community? What do we think the important parts of parks are and who they're for? And yeah, I still believe that it's worthwhile. And I hope, and I will work. It's not just hope, I'm committed to putting my shoulder to it as well, is to help evolve the system so that it does not run out of incredible, talented humans like Hanako again. And I know it's going to happen again. It's happening right now. But is there a possibility that there is an institution that is more willing to hold the differences of background and thought and idea, and to let go of some of the broken institutions and to reimagine the future? That is what I want to be a part of. That's what I want to be a part of. It's awesome to be here with you all. You've watched me shed 3 tears now. I really do care about this stuff. God, I really appreciate you all. I'm glad you were here. And yeah.
Well, Jesse, how can people support your organization?
Oh, yeah, we have on our, let me just share this again, and if folks want to take a look. Yeah, here we go. So I got Amache Alliance and People in Parks websites up on this slide. If folks want to write those down, we have 14 new projects up for funding right now. We are raising money to try and do as much good for as many parks as possible in this era. We believe that we can help more, and we want to tell more stories. We don't want to do less. We don't want to try and play it safe. We are trying to do more when the need is great. And so on our landing page, you can check out our new projects, many of which, project in Cesar Chavez, project at Hana Uli Uli, project at Amache, there are project at Manzanar, Orchard Restoration. There are many that I think fall within the category of sites of conscience, and I think these are the places that are, I personally really want to put energy. And then, Mitch, can people donate through Amache Alliance? You have a donate button on your, yeah.
They can donate to the Amache Alliance. Some of our some of our big events like the pilgrimage, the community open house, people could volunteer. We've grown our volunteer pool by 15-fold over the last 3 years, and in our volunteer pool, we not only help out the Amache site, but also around the town of Grenada and stuff like that too, and setting up for the pilgrimage. We've been supporting the NPS Rangers, helping them with some of their tours and stuff like that too. And so, like Jesse said, I just want to iterate, all the sites have, really special, really cool programs, even, sites like Heart Mountain, which is not in the NPS portfolio, and Topaz, they all have programs and pilgrimages, and, just being involved in the community and promoting the education of our family stories, I think is really important, really key. And getting, the surrounding rangers, the surrounding sites, the surrounding communities involved in your programs and stuff too is really special. We appreciate, I'll make a plug for you, Kimiko, the Tadaima, the ability to reach online, a whole different audience. In Amache, our first virtual pilgrimage during COVID was 2020 or 2021, and that reached a whole new audience for us. And several of those people that came to that first virtual pilgrimage for us are core volunteers for us now, are in our leadership on programs now. So the ability to just reach out, this past pilgrimage, we had a family come over from England because they wanted to come visit their family site. We had a family come up from Mexico. The family from Mexico came up, they left the United States because they were so disgusted with their World War II experience. And they came back and they want to volunteer and help us out around the site and stuff. And so every little bit we do does matter.
Well, that's I think the perfect way to, you just wrap that up with a bow, Mitch. So thank you both for this conversation. I'm sure that people will have a lot to process. But they could probably, if they had questions, they could reach you all through your respective organizations. I put the links in the chat.
Also, I'll drop my email if anyone wants to reach out.
And that's great. And hopefully everybody will think about, different ways that they can support national parks or telling the story. And, every little bit helps.
I wanted one last plug for Mitch and for pilgrimage. I think that sometimes people don't know or know if pilgrimage is for them. And I just think it is an amazing collection of people that are dedicated to civil and human rights. And so if that is a core value that you hold, you belong at pilgrimage. So you should go. You should go.
Even if you don't, you should go.
Even if you don't, you should go. You should go. But
Everybody should go at least once, and because they are amazing.
they're amazing. They're powerful, and they're very inclusive of other communities, you know, and tell other stories. And so even if your personal story isn't at that particular site, you'll probably connect with people that you have a lot in shared and common experience with. So,
Absolutely.
right.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you all
Nico.
for coming, and thank you, Mitch and Jesse, for sharing all of your thoughts and information, little insider stuff maybe. And let's all go forth and make a change, a positive change.
Thanks, Kimiko.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you.
Be well.